You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Before I stick to script, which is something I seldom do, I want to read one of the opening paragraphs of the book written by today's guest, and I quote, "The techniques suggested in this book should not be used by anyone under 18 years of age. To the extent permitted by law, no liability is accepted by the author or publisher for any loss, damage, or injury arising as a consequence of attempting the processes described in this book." What are you laughing about? This is serious stuff. In case you guys are wondering what we're talking about today, we're talking about a new book called Polaroid, The Complete Guide to Experimental Instant Photography, if it wasn't obvious. So anyway, that's it. Today, John and I welcome photographer, curator, and author Rhiannon Adam to the show to speak about her new book, as I said, Polaroid, The Complete Guide to Experimental Instant Photography, which itself is a second edition update of the book of the same title originally published in 2017, and it's now available in paperback. The book is basically divided into two sections, one on the history, innovation, and gear of instant photography, and the second being a compilation of creative how-to instant photography techniques. Welcome to the show, Rhiannon, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So this is a topic that is dear to my heart because before we start talking about the book, I just want to go on record. My early childhood was recorded by my Uncle Jerry, who had a Model 95, one of the original Polaroids, which was introduced back, 1946, 47, something like that. And I used SX70s as soon as they were introduced, and I had Polaroid backs for my 4x5, my Pentax 6.7, and Nikon systems when I shot commercially before digital came out. So I lived and died by Polaroid, and this book is absolutely wonderful, both as a tool about the technical aspect of it and the creative aspect of it. It's really wonderful. Okay, Rhiannon is based in London and New York, for those of you who are not familiar with her. In addition to writing about instant photography, she has published Dreamlands, Wastelands, a photography book of instant photos, and has just published a new book called Big Fence, Pitcairn Island. Her photography has been published and exhibited widely, including the New York Times, Art Review, The Guardian, Huck Magazine, the British Journal of Photography, Dazed and Confused, and Harper's Bazaar. Her work is represented by LA Noble Gallery. Welcome to the show. Let's talk about Polaroid.
My favorite topic.
Can you give us a little overview of the basic history in 25 words or less? The story of Polaroid and specifically Dr. Land and his role in it.
Okay, so, Polaroid as we know it now, we kind of think of it as these little square-framed images that are kind of got plasticky. We think about them as kind of something we might shoot at a party. But really the goal of Polaroid from the outset was not that, actually. It was to make a kind of groundbreaking photographic format that could compete with any of the professional formats that existed at the time. And so we're talking about, going back to the 1940s. So Edwin Land, who founded Polaroid, he was actually a Harvard chemistry dropout. And he decided that he was going to basically sneak into the lab late at night and fiddle around. And he kind of, he ended up designing all kinds of things. So Polaroid is just one of them. And we have him to thank for so many inventions that we just take for granted.
Including Polaroid glasses.
Yeah, Polaroid glasses, or like a sheet polarizer, basically arranging how we see white light when we look at a computer screen without a sheet polarizer on it. We don't see, the color that we see when we can see words or pictures. We just see like a bright white light, whereas he kind of organized light rays to be able to render a visible image. So this kind of technology is the basis of so many things that we see all the time. And one of his major inventions in the early days was actually on car headlights. He was walking across Times Square and he saw the dazzling lights reflected in the wet pavement. And so that's kind of what led him to kind of create the sheet polarizer, where you could organize these scattered light rays into something that was containable. And that's a technology that became, used in Polaroid film, in all kinds of film that we use today. So he's really an inventor at heart, and he was on holiday, the legend goes, with his daughter and his patent lawyer, and as every good inventor does. So he was wandering along with his daughter, taking some pictures on his camera, and he would have been shooting at that time, with a big, like a Rolleiflex. And his daughter was like, "Well, so Daddy, why can't I see the pictures instantly?" I mean, this is the kind of the legend of the story. And he went, "Oh, yeah, don't know actually." Obviously, that was a British rendition of what he probably said. I doubt he would have said "don't know" actually, but you get my drift. And so he goes back, sketches out a few ideas on a hotel napkin, hands it over to his patent lawyer, who starts, getting the ball rolling. And then before you know it, we're on the long train to kind of the perfect instant photograph. So the early experiments that he started with, they were all called SX something. So that just stands for special experiment. So the film that we have today, where you can see SX 70, that actually just stands for Special Experiment 70. So in the early days, he was really struggling with this idea of how do you develop a photograph in light? How do you actually take a light sensitive material and have it without a darkroom to develop in light? So this was a problem that took many years to solve. And eventually that's why we have the kind of plastic coated film that we have now, because that contains like a light shield within the film that clears. But in the early days, it was like a sandwich of two materials, a negative and a positive, and a chemical pouch that would be squished as it went through a set of rollers. And the earliest cameras were these roll film cameras, which were incredible because he realized that there were different tax levels on heavier equipment. So he made these cameras incredibly heavy and cumbersome for the first batch to avoid much of the tax that would have been applied. So they were cumbersome, and there were not very many of them, and they were difficult to use. And he had terrible problems with the black and white film. He had terrible problems with it turning sepia. He had terrible problems with the prints curling up. And so it was really kind of it was a bit of a Silicon Valley approach to development in a way. It was the kind of, let's just try ideas and release them, and then we'll tweak them and we'll fix them and we'll make another and we'll make another, we'll make it better and we'll make it better. So it was always like releasing products to market, before they were even like 100% perfect, which was, I think, what made, land such an inspiration to people like Steve Jobs, because he really just kind of threw the ideas out there. And so, yeah, I mean, it was completely groundbreaking. I mean, imagine a press conference back in the 40s when you have all of these guys with big press cameras. They're holding these massive flashes. They're working with like, Graflex or something similar, shooting on 5.4, then having to rush back, process all of the neg, get it into press. And then there's this guy doing this demo where he just brings out this massive camera and takes a picture of his own face and peels it right in front of everyone's eyes, and there it is. I mean, it was completely, made for all the photographers and all of the press in the room. So you can understand why Polaroid was quite an instant runaway invention, and everyone wanted a piece of it.
These are very, very slow cameras. I think it's worth mentioning. The lenses weren't fast, and there was a lot of light loss. And I believe the ISO of the original pack films was something like 3,000.
Yeah. So, 3,000 was the black and white film. So that's, yes. Some of it was 3,000. So that would be the kind of the later editions of the pack film. But yeah, like the early edition of the pack film, the roll film rather, it was really difficult to operate for kind of everyday Joe. It was cumbersome. The cameras were not super simple. There was a lot of getting stuck. It wasn't the easiest, but it did last for quite a long time. And of course, Polaroid, at that time, they were trying to compete with the likes of Kodak. And Kodak were the market leader, and I mean, arguably still are the market leader. And they were really struggling with that. So they went through a massive kind of, rebranding strategy, which was one of Polaroid's main kind of success points, and why we kind of are so familiar with the Polaroid brand today. But we saw, Polaroid go from this kind of fledgling little company to being this kind of master of marketing, and with it brought along with it all of the kind of camera tech.
So, Rhiannon, we it was really interesting in your book, the aspect about how the brand became a major aspect of the company itself. But what I was kind of curious about is the lawsuit that came about between Kodak and Polaroid, and how that to some degree led to the dissolution of the company. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the beginning, Polaroid and Kodak were almost on the same team. So even though they were competitors on some levels, Polaroid was seen to be doing quite a different thing. And so in the early days, as I was mentioning earlier about the sheet polarizer, the Kodak actually gave them a contract to develop sheet polarizer for them. So that was how it went in the beginning. And then when Polaroid wanted to produce their own film, Kodak were the ones who actually helped deliver that film. So they were the ones who were manufacturing the negative component of the Polaroid film. And they even actually helped with the production of the first color film. So in the beginning, it wasn't an acrimonious relationship. But then in 1972, the SX70 came out, and Polaroid obviously thought this was the most groundbreaking invention ever. And this is what they'd been working on. This was the kind of ultimate example of their full mission, having a picture to develop in light in a short space of time with pretty good color accuracy and sharpness. But, behind the scenes, Kodak had decided that they wanted a piece of that pie too. And they were actually developing their own instant cameras in secret. So they had actually made a camera that they wanted to call the Lanyard. And it involved pulling film through rollers by a cord in a very similar sort of fashion to how Polaroid were operating. But of course, Kodak's product was nowhere near as good and, fell by the wayside. But then when, the SX70 was coming out, Kodak decided to try and introduce their own kind of Instamatic type cameras. And so they had various renditions of this. They had like party time camera, happy times camera. You could see the market that they were trying to get with this. And so in 76, Kodak actually released this camera. And what's really, I actually love this. For a while, when the Polaroid lawsuit came about, and Kodak had to pull all of the cameras from the market, my favorite thing is that a lot of people going around yard sales would pick these up because you couldn't get the film, you couldn't buy the cameras, and it was just a defunct product. And there was a Kodak kind of recall that happened, and if you could ping off the faceplate from the camera, the Kodak camera that was defunct, and send it back to Kodak, you could receive basically money. And so loads of people would just go around yard sales and ping off these front plates and then send it back into Kodak for kind of credit. So I loved that was still going on for years until they eventually canceled the program. So that was one of my favorite little random bits of trivia. But so actually, I think Land got completely obsessed with the court case. He was turning up in court pretty much every single day. He was all guns blazing for it, and he kind of took his eye off the ball with the company. And this lawsuit, it started, in so in 1976 is when they released the first cameras. And then it was just like a few days later that they decided to, Polaroid filed a patent infringement case. And then it took until 1985 before anything was sorted out. So in the meantime, of course, Land took his eye off the ball. The products were not being updated in the way they would have been. It was kind of falling by the wayside in terms of competition. And, business-wise, he wasn't always the greatest businessman. He was very passionate about what he did, but he was not always the greatest businessman and didn't always make the best business choices. So, in the end, so much money was spent on legal fees and not enough was spent on product development. So really, it did lead to kind of Polaroid's demise in a sense.
But they won the lawsuit, correct?
Yeah, they did. They won the lawsuit. But it was, in 1990 when they actually won it. And I think it was like 909 million. So it was actually one of the biggest, if not the biggest, patent infringement award that had ever been granted. But then, Land actually died in 1991. So he wasn't around for very long after that. And it was like it sucked all of his energy. And then once Land had left the company, it really went downhill for a time, and it seemed to be, being run by kind of succession of businessmen that all thought they could turn the company's fortunes around, but didn't really necessarily have a passion for the product or really what it was doing. So it was just like trying to mass market, kind of just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what would stick approach.
I had a friend who was a photo enthusiast, and any spare money that he had, he would invest into camera companies that he liked. And it was very funny when this lawsuit was settled. I ran into him like a day or two later, and he was kind of laughing about it. He goes, they finally settled the case, because he was talking about it. He goes, in one day, I lost $1 million and made $1 million. It was a wash for him the way it worked out. It's like whatever he lost, he gained from the other side. He owned stock in both companies.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like a seesaw. It was like a seesaw for a time. It really was. It was like this ongoing battle between this kind of, two massive players in the industry. And of course, it was a really problematic camera that Kodak decided to come out with, and it wasn't as good as Polaroid's own camera. I should mention that as well, that it was actually terrible. The picture quality is bad. Objectively, it was not a great product. But Kodak, meanwhile, were focusing on everything else in their business, while Polaroid were, just languishing, waiting for the result of a lawsuit and spending all of their time in court. So, yeah, sad.
Maybe that leads us then to the next kind of stage in the evolution of the company's life. And if I'm not mistaken, by 2008, Polaroid was done, but Polaroid still exists, right? And Fujifilm had a part to do with that, and of course, ultimately the Impossible project. Maybe you could bring us up to speed on that.
Yeah, so it was a sad day, 2008. I remember it well.
Really?
Yeah, I do, because because at that time I was actually working as a photographer's agent, and I remember when the announcement came that Polaroid was done and dusted, and it was awful. I worked near a place called the Pro Centre, which I guess is a bit similar to like a mini version of B&H in London. And I was at my desk, and it was about half a mile away, and I read the announcement. I was like, oh no. So I went to the Pro Centre, and I thought, I'm going to buy all the Polaroid film that they have. And and I realized I forgot my card when I got to the desk, and I was like, oh no. So I ran back to the office, went to go and get my card. I ran back to the Pro Centre. By the time I'd got back, Nick Knight had bought every single pack that they had in stock. So so yeah, thank you, Nick Knight, for giving me a really bad day in 2008. Yeah, so after many iterations of kind of new management, eventually Polaroid had been bought by kind of Thomas Petters, and it was basically being run as a bit of a pyramid scheme. So he ended up in jail, and then all the assets were seized. So it got really messy. So anything that was worth anything was just generally sold off. And the land was sold, and so that meant the factory had to basically be dismantled, and so that meant a lot of machinery went by the wayside, and of course with that meant that the technology effectively died. So there was one factory in Enschede in the Netherlands, and at the time there was this factory was kind of the last one running, and this one was the factory that was responsible for producing much of the integral film. So at that time, there was pack film, there was 5x4 sheet film, there was 8x10, which had pretty much just died a slow death because professional photographers were just not shooting with Polaroid anymore, though we had other things by then. And then we had integral film, and so integral film is the film that we still see being produced today.
And can I ask why? What is the reason for that phrase, integral film? So
integral just means that every single part of the film is inside of the film sheet itself. There isn't sort of a two-part system, which is that's the difference between pack film and integral film. Is that pack film, it is essentially a lot of negatives and a lot of chemical pouches and a lot of positive receiving sheets, and they're kind of folded together in this system. So when you pull one tab, it causes one part to align with another, and then you pull a second tab, squish the pod, pull the sandwich out, and then when you peel it apart, you actually usually discard the negative portion, which just contains all of the dyes, and you just keep the receiver sheet, which is the finished print. And so that's quite a different system to the integral film, which is where you press a button, the picture ejects from the camera and everything just develops in it. There was nothing to throw away. It is what it is. And that, as I was kind of mentioning in the beginning stages of this, was that there's an opacification layer, which is basically a light shield. And so how it works is that there is alkali meets acid. And as the chemistry diffuses through the multiple kind of hair-thin layers of chemical within the film pouch, the acid neutralizes the alkali, which clears a kind of like a cloudy filter that covers the film. So most people think that when the picture comes out, the picture isn't really developed yet. It's not really that it's not developed yet. It's more that the opacification layer hasn't cleared yet, so you can't see the picture yet. So actually what we're seeing is the light shield gradually disappearing to reveal the image beneath. And that was there, so it was just stopped the light sensitive negative at the bottom, which is the back side of the film pouch, from being damaged by the light. So that's what it's there for.
Something I used to love doing were Polaroid transfers, and that was with the pack film, and specifically Type 669, which was a really nice film stock. And it was kind of neat. What you do is, again, you take your picture and pull it through to squeegee it and get it going. But rather than hold everything together for a minute and then pull the print away, you wait about 5 to 10 seconds, pull away the receiver, and then put it on directly on top of a piece of moistened watercolor paper, and then burnish it down, and then the dyes transfer to the watercolor paper. And it was pastel-like. And I have some that I made back in the 80s that are still hanging on my walls. They've held up remarkably well.
I mean, you can use that method to transfer onto basically anything that's porous, ceramic or wood or whatever it is. But yeah, anything that's kind of smooth and porous, you could use that method. So that's one of my favorite, simple creative techniques, actually, is that one.
Are there any materials out from any of the so-called Polaroid companies that will do that, or is that technology just gone right now?
Yeah, it's gone. There is one instant which is being produced, which has, you can actually, it has some limited functionality with transfers. I mean, it's not amazing with it, but one instant is basically a single sheet loading mechanism that is being also made by Dock Caps and SuperSense. So that's the guy. Just to rewind slightly, we just kind of touched on the demise of Polaroid, but in Enschede in the Netherlands, that factory was sitting there, and it was still producing film. And Doc, who at the time was running a website, which I was really heavily a part of, it was called Polaroid, and there was a kind of sales arm to it, which was called Unsaleable, and they used to sell a lot of dead stock Polaroid film and things that had, just expired. Back then, we used to think it was really expensive when a pack of SX70 would cost, sort of 15 euros or something like that. But
I have a pack of 669. I'm willing to give it up for $700 right now. I don't even know if it's good, but
nice try. You can't blame a trier.
No.
But yeah, so they ended up with leasing this factory. So Doc and team leased the factory, and they had to come out with a film pretty quickly because they didn't have any of the chemistry anymore. So when Polaroid died, it effectively took all of its supply chain with it. So that meant all of the kind of niche chemicals that were very difficult to source, all of the things that you had to order by the 20 tons. Of course, that wasn't possible for a small fledgling company. And some of it was, by this point, not allowed. Some of it was difficult. Polaroid had been pretty much the only person buying it, so companies had gone out of business. It was a real sham. So they had to develop a new film from the ground up. And I remember that they went back to the original Polaroid naming system, so Type 40 and Type 43, which were Polaroid's original film names from roll film back in the day. And they produced a kind of an experimental black and white film, which was very, very difficult to work with, I have to say.
And were these folks that were doing this, were they just devotees? They love the process. They love it to film, and they wanted to keep it going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Doc who he'd actually, had a lot to do with Lomo, and a lot of the guys there had a lot to do with Lomo originally. So it was kind of like born and bred from a kind of a grassroots enthusiast level. And that's what was so magical about it in those early days. It was just that it was literally people that really believed that instant film was worth saving, that all of these millions of cameras, and I really do mean millions of cameras, shouldn't be destined for landfill, that there should be a material that would mean that these cameras could have life and new generations could enjoy them. I mean, that was really the mission. Because if you think about the just millions of cameras and how much plastic and waste that is just to become, ornaments on a shelf gathering dust. I mean, it's so sad when it was this completely groundbreaking idea of what a photograph could be, and it just languishes there on a bookshelf gathering, dust bunnies. So they ended up leasing this factory and then produced this experimental film. I remember being shipped a few packs of it, and I was so excited. And I received this film, opened it up, put it in the camera, took the pictures, and they were all white. And it's because the opacification layer hadn't been perfected. So as soon as you exposed it to any kind of light when it came out of the camera, it was just basically, it was like taking a piece of darkroom paper and just turning on the lights. That's effectively what I was doing. And then they had all these things like frog tongues to attach to the front of your camera to shield it for a few seconds. And I was taping bits of cardboard to the front of it. And then I had to send these images back to be shown at Photokina. And I think that by the time that they'd arrived, they were basically all blank. So they were asking us all to, if you haven't sent them by UPS yet, could you just photograph them before you send them? And I was like, this is so kind of defeating the point of Polaroid. But I mean, in a way that whole like experimental, let's just try it. Come on. I mean, it was incredible that they got that far, honestly. But, and they did actually get it to a point where it was a workable material, Impossible project film. I remember feeling, devastated that this was all the material that there was at the time. But now I look back on those days and I kind of love the experimental nature of it, and that every single iteration would be completely different from the last. Every single one of them would develop in a slightly different way and have a different personality and a different character, even down to individual packs.
And it's great that there was at least a small market for them, right? I mean, it seems that folks like yourself and others, I mean, I remember at the time reading about it and being a little confused as to what was going on, but sensing the energy that, was brought by the Impossible Project.
Yeah. I mean, Unsaleable and Impossible Project, they basically had 2 years to make a product. They'd raised enough funding, but it wasn't much. Not much by kind of today's standards of what we're expecting. You hear numbers being thrown about whenever you look at business startups, and I mean, their budgets were just tiny. They actually became kind of a sustainable business to an extent, but there was it was a bit of an issue with different manufacturers producing parts of the film. Ilford was producing part of the film, producing the negative portion, and that was difficult and expensive. They tried to produce, I know Dark's dream was to kind of bring it all in-house, and then that was difficult. You needed to raise more money, and it was tough. So Polaroid instant photography, it's had a bit of a rough ride.
And can you then kind of bring us up to date in terms of this is actually a part that confused me to no end at some point. All of a sudden, Polaroid is back and they're marketing cameras again. So can you then kind of bring us up to date in terms of the companies themselves?
Yeah, wow, it's really confusing. I mean, honestly, it's really confusing for everyone, and you can imagine how trying to put this into book form is really difficult. Which is why we've sort of stuck with Impossible Project, because if you look on the back of a pack of Polaroid film, it still says it's produced by Impossible BV. So the actual company that produces the film is still called Impossible, but the Polaroid name had been bought back by what was Impossible. So for a while, the Polaroid name had just been being held as an asset. So it was being slapped over all sorts of other products like, televisions or, I don't know, photo frames or, little miniature digital camera printers and things like that.
Could you back up? Is a Polaroid television?
Oh yeah, it wasn't made by Polaroid. It was literally a Chinese manufacturer producing a television would license the name and just stick Polaroid on it because it kind of had some gravitas. So
you turn it on and instantly you get movies. What a novel idea!
I know, so novel, so novel,
wow,
so novel.
God.
I mean, actually, speaking of that was a real land failed invention. I don't know if you ever saw one of those, a Polavision. camera. He tried to produce a instant movie camera at one point, which was pretty crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, it was huge. You had to have a thing that looked almost like a television to be able to insert the cartridge into it. So it wasn't exactly portable. You had to have all of this massive, I mean, it was so expensive as well. It was one of the most expensive, pieces of equipment that Polaroid ever really produced. I mean, the camera itself is actually quite beautiful. I've got a couple of them, but yeah, they are unfortunately just ornaments. But yeah, the viewer for it was so huge. You had to take out the little tiny 3-minute cartridge and stick it into this massive television. So I can't imagine you actually taking that on holiday and being like, "Hey, gather around, everyone."
Something that I'm curious about, and that is that Polaroid was never a perfect film or print, image quality wise, but some of them were really quite nice, especially the larger format. And again, if you had the right camera using it, the pictures could be quite remarkable. Are any of the current incarnations of what we call Polaroid or instant photographs up to the standards of the best that Polaroid itself was able to produce back in the day?
No. For various reasons. One of them is that the film that we have now is essentially 600 speed, the 600 film, or we have SX70 film. That's what we use in the kind of consumer level cameras. And then it's that film effectively scaled up for the different formats. So there is like an 8x10, but that's exactly the same material, just made larger. There's nothing different about it. And with an integral film, you have some diffusion that goes on because you have all of the dye is actually in kind of very, very microscopically thin layers on top of a negative. And then the chemical spreads between the negative and the kind of front window of the film, which is our viewing window. And this is why it doesn't come out in reverse, because we're actually viewing everything diffusing upwards from the negative. So there's no mirrors in these cameras, which is, so that's how, we're viewing that. But the thing is about that layer system is that it causes this spread. So you're never going to have a completely pin sharp image because the chemical is spreading, and with it, the dye is spreading ever so slightly. So it creates that beautiful kind of luminous softness.
Like a halation.
Yeah. And with the SX70 film, the original SX70 kind of time zero film, the material was thinner. So there was less spread because the actual material itself was thinner and the chemical was effectively runnier. So you ended up seeing a more kind of pin sharp image at, say, 10 inches away. And if you bring it up closer to your eye, you'll realize that there is that diffusion. And that's what made Polaroid was so beautiful in its handling of light. That is what was incredible about it. But at the same time, you're never going to get a pin sharp image. The difference with, say, a pack film image or something that was shot, say, on sheet film, like, say, the negative versions that you could use where they like the 55 or 665 where you had a reusable negative. I mean, that is completely different because you're not dealing with looking at a positive print. You're actually looking at the developed negative. So the chemical just develops, when it pops the pod, the chemical just develops the negative and the positive. But when you're looking at the negative, you're not looking at anything filtered through any diffusion layer. You're not looking at it through layers of chemical. You actually wash all that chemical away. So that would produce an incredibly high definition negative. And, in the early days, just, the goal was for Land to produce a product that could compete with the best products out there. So he actually employed Ansel Adams to go around and build the Polaroid collection, to advise on buying prints, going to student shows, going to art shows, buying what was considered to be the kind of the best that photography could offer, and using that as inspiration for the product. So the goal was always to make a product that could compete 100% with anything that was produced by any other method.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, more with Rhiannon Adam to talk more about her book, Polaroid, The Complete Guide to Experimental Instant Photography. We're talking more about creative techniques and some of the cameras and technology went along with it. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. And again, we're here with Rhiannon Adam and her book, Polaroid, The Complete Guide to Experimental Instant Photography. And it's a great, great subject. There's a lot we could talk about. Can we talk about some of the current cameras that are available for instant photography? Call them Polaroid cameras or whatever you want.
Yeah, sure. That problematic term. So Polaroid, as we were just discussing in the break, Polaroid is this name that's just become synonymous with instant photography. So people just throw it around as though it's all one and the same, and it gets very confusing. So there are multiple companies that actually produce Polaroid type camera tech. So, and by that I mean instant films. So right now you have Fuji, which produces most of the kind of small format stuff that teenagers love to use. So the kind of Instax Mini and Instax Wide.
I think it's also worth mentioning that back when Polaroid was still a major producer of instant film, Fuji came out with their own version of it, and also I think used some of the technologies of Polaroid. And there was some legal stuff going on, and the way they settled it was the Fuji, what is called Fujiroid, can only be sold in Japan, although some of it did find its way here. I happen to know that. But it was actually a better version of what Polaroid themselves did. It was a little bit sharper and truer color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it.
And again, they came to a truce.
Yeah, they did. And in return, Polaroid were allowed to use certain things that Fuji had, like CD, back in the days when we used to make mix CDs and such like, re-recordable media, VHS tapes, all of that sort of thing. So Fuji were producing that, and Polaroid were allowed to do that in kind of a swap. But yeah, so there was a bit of a moratorium on Fuji selling in the US for a time that expired, which is now why we kind of have it worldwide. But so you have Fuji, which do produce like pretty reliable film. Their film you can't do as much with in terms of experimental trickery. So a lot of the techniques that are in the book, you can't actually do with that film. And there are various reasons for that. It's just like the way that it develops, it actually develops, you actually load it in the back of the camera. So you load it in the back of the camera back to front. So you're actually taking a picture and it takes it through the back of the film. So it's quite different in terms of structure of the actual film sheet, which is one of the reasons why you can't do as much that's creative with it. Mm-hmm. And then you have obviously Polaroid itself. And so Polaroid have, right now they have the Now Plus, the Go, which is a really cute little small format, trying to compete with Fuji Instax. And then you have the more experimental side of everything. So you have, one instant that's being produced by Dot Caps and Supersense. And so that's that really interesting single sheet pack film. And of course, there will be coming back in stock Polaroid 8x10. So you can have Polaroid 8x10 integral film, which, it doesn't look like integral film when you buy it. It comes in all the parts like it used to, but it's pretty much similar to the film that we see that Polaroid produces in its smaller formats. So there's that. And then, of course, Polaroid will sell refurb cameras. So it'll sell like SX70 vintage cameras or 600 vintage cameras. And those ones you can only use, the 600 film or the SX70 film. The Now and the Now Plus, those ones use I-type, which is exactly the same film as what 600 is, except that it just doesn't have a battery in it because the camera itself charges instead of the battery being contained within the film pack to power the camera, which is how it always used to work. So if you ever go into yard sales and you want to know if a camera works, always the best trick is to buy one pack of 600 film and one pack of SX70 film because they have different notches on them. And so you can't always insert one into the other. It was so that you didn't accidentally put the wrong film into the wrong camera that was calibrated for a different film speed. And when those packs are done and empty, they actually still retain charge. So you can just put the empty film pack into the camera and just see if it cycles through all of the functions as it should. So that's what I do, and I often just insert a picture that I've already shot into the film back into the film pack, and then I just use that and see if it spits it out as it should.
That's an interesting thing you mentioned, that with the pack films, that they came with their own batteries. That was another interesting innovation that Dr. Land came up with, is that the batteries to run the SX70, which had extremely high speed, high torque engines in them, there's a lot of very fine gearing that went into that machine. Everything was designed from scratch. Nothing existed before that. They had to come up with a power system, and the answer was to come up with a wafer-thin battery that would fit into the film pack. And again, it had a real long life. It packed a lot of wattage into it, and lasted a long time. And that was also one of the dangerous things about it, because one of the downsides of that Polaroid SX70 battery technology was, for the first time, terrorists were able to literally make letter bombs that were the thickness of a letter with plastique.
It's really crazy, isn't it? When you start thinking about all of the things that connect and all of the, I mean, not that Land's inventions were always completely, ethical. Lots of his inventions have been used in warfare. The military was his main money maker for the longest time. Instant photography was more like a pet project. It was just a sideline.
I also was reading that Leica made, or are they still making an instant camera?
Yeah, so Leica are, but they, So the Leica cameras, they're basically producing like pretty much exactly the same as Fuji mini camera. So Leica do produce it, but it's pretty much the same. So Fuji have their mini square film, and that's essentially the same thing as what Leica have. And then, Lomo as well, and they just use Fuji technology as well. So it's, those companies, they're kind of piggybacking off of the kind of core tech, and the core tech, I guess, is really...
Yeah, they're licensing from each other and trying to create new little markets. Sure.
Yeah.
So generally what's out there is you have Fujifilm and their Instax, and then the people that they are working with. And then you have Polaroid, which is also, or was, the Impossible Project, who are making film. And is there still stocks of old film available, vintage film?
You can get it.
Yeah,
you can hunt it down. I mean, I hunt it down with a lot of regularity. I mean, there's Facebook groups and things like that for all kinds of nerds and enthusiasts like me, and there's regularly people just selling their stock because they realize that they, stockpiled a hell of a lot of it and they can't get through it all. So, it's not cheap anymore, but you can get it. And I mean,
you have to keep in mind that anything you're going to buy of that is all expired, and it was to say that we can't guarantee it's going to work at all.
No, and it's all about storage. If you see someone that said, "Oh, so I'm selling this film that I've stored in a cupboard in Texas," probably chances are not going to work too well. If someone says, "You know what, I've had this cold stored because I'm a professional photographer and this has just been sitting there in my studio," your chances are a lot better. So bear that in mind. Always ask the question of how it's been stored if you're ever buying vintage, expired film.
And you'd kind of mentioned nerds. I don't want to really
use
that word too much. Okay, that's fine. And I know obviously my daughter included, a lot of teens are buying the Instax and using those, and they're posting them on their walls and the whole thing. And then of course, sharing them digitally. But who out there is really looking for, the interesting stuff, and what is out there that's interesting that let's say a nerd might want to find, or let's just call him an enthusiast, an instant film enthusiast. Are there something that's really unique that only certain collectors or photographers might have, that someone wants to get, and what is the standard stuff that people are using?
I mean, so there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things that Polaroid have produced over time. So for me, in my nerd capacity, my favorite thing that I own is the iClite underwater housing for an SX70 camera, which is the most cumbersome and difficult to use item ever. And I think I've only ever taken 2 packs of film with it because it's so difficult. But it's brilliant. It's like you put an SX70 camera in it, a folding SX70 camera, and you have this massive underwater housing with 2 huge handles on it and a little lever, which aligns with a button so that you can press the shutter, and then like a little front extension on, so that there's an area for the pictures to develop into. So that's pretty crazy, and people hunt those down. And then of course, you've got all the things like the gold SX70 cameras, which, there were different models of this, certain ones that were released for employees, certain ones that were produced for specific events. Some of them were given as gifts by land, so that's a thing that people
did that
go
a
after.
lot, by the way.
Yeah.
I had a friend who worked at Polaroid and worked closely with Land, and he was known to always have a leather a Polaroid. They made beautiful leather cases for their cameras that had the flash and all the other stuff in it. And he was always known to have at least one with him and a couple in the trunk of his car. And he would walk around there and he would start taking pictures. And if people would come over and he would strike a conversation, tell them all about it. And at the end of the conversation, he would often give them the case of cameras.
I mean, I
he
wouldn't
was
say
known
no.
to do that.
I wouldn't say no.
But it's the XX70 that is really the prime piece of equipment that people want, and then enthusiasts and even artists who are using it is what they're looking for, correct?
Yeah, I mean, SX70, it's such a thing of beauty. I mean, you cannot deny, just as a piece of physical design, it's a stunning object.
It's in the design collection of the Museum of Modern Art.
Yeah, it's iconic. I mean, you cannot, I mean, it is, I mean, what's amazing about it as well is that it packs all of this technology into something that can fold, and it folds so neatly. You don't have any need for lens caps or, any of this stuff. I mean, it was amazing for its time. And it still holds up remarkably well. I shoot with an SX70 regularly, and I rarely have problems with them. And this is, these are cameras that are from the 70s, and they're still going strong. And they have so many moving parts. It's not like a regular camera where you've got a shutter that you can go and service. I mean, this thing, it's, millions of gears in it. I mean, it's a really, complex machine with an electric eye that, it corrects your exposure and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, there are different versions of it. There's the sonar, which is amazing as well. That would send out a sound wave and automatically adjust your focus. So they're a brilliant camera. And then of course you have like the version of that's for 600. So you have the SLR 680 and the 690. And those ones are basically SX70 cameras that take 600 film and that have a flash on the top that you can switch on and off. So for many people, that's the kind of best of both worlds. And then you've got like Mint camera. I mean, they're amazing. Mint actually take apart SX70 cameras, and they have their own little module that they've developed where you can plug it into the flash bar socket. And so you can, control the duration of your exposure. You can swap between films, so you can have 600 or SX70 film in it. So that's kind of the ultimate camera that you can just buy with a guarantee from a reputable website that, is a bona fide SX70, but also has all of the added features that a professional enthusiast might want.
And what did an SX70 cost at the time? Does anyone know? Alan, do you remember?
I think about $300, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that range.
And now, if you were to buy them vintage,
about $700.
Yeah.
I think people, younger people might not realize how much the instant film and Polaroid was used in many practical applications. I mean, I think of when I used to work on film shoots, and continuity people, wardrobe people, they all had a ring around their belt with Polaroids because they needed to refer to these to make sure that, the images were, continuous throughout the whole movie that they were shooting. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so many things they were used for at the time in really a practical sense.
Well, a lot of the film that I stockpiled when Polaroid was going out and digital was coming in actually came from various law enforcement departments that were getting rid of Polaroid because, Polaroid was brilliant for turning up at a crime scene and being able to take images, immediately slot them into a file. You didn't have to have any fear about taking them back to a lab and it being messed up at any point, or, the chain of custody being broken or tampering. The great thing about a Polaroid image for law enforcement purposes was that you could not edit the image once it was taken. There was no one in a darkroom could crop anything out. It is what it is. And it was used for insurance for that reason. And each individual Polaroid picture has a unique code on the back of it. So they would log the codes. So if you went to go and, I don't know, photograph, say there was a suspected arson or something like that, where you needed to gather a lot of photographic evidence, they would take down all the individual picture codes because you knew that no one could go and slot one in and swap it around because it had an individual code on the back of it. So it was.
I never knew. That's right. There were numbers. That's right.
They have numbers, and those numbers, they relate to who it was that was working on the machine that day, what number machine, what the date was, which factory location. So you could.
That's how they found me.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But at the same time, even though they had this incredible coding system, what's amazing is there are a couple of calculators online where you can go and work out from your Polaroid picture, where that originated from, what factory. It's like total nerd stuff, but that's quite fun. So you can work out what date a picture was taken. If you buy one online or you find one in an estate sale or something like that, and you want to know when it was from, you can check the production run. You can check the date pretty easily on the back. But also, the thing that no one ever talks about, which was such a big thing in the early days, was pornography. People don't talk about it, but taking pictures at home and not having to take pictures to a lab, like taking roller film to a lab to go and be processed, where your private pictures would be shown around a whole load of guys like laughing about it.
Wow. Yeah, this is clearly a conversation that could go on for a long time. I mean, I do want to jump ahead, though, a bit and talk a little bit about, the rest of the book. And we won't be able to get into all of it, but totally encourage our listeners to check it out, because the second half of Rhiannon's book is techniques and creative applications and things you can try. And it not only discusses them, there's really a how-to, and it's a really wonderful book, and it's kind of inspiring in its way to get you to try these things. So
it's a great source book. It really is. I think I know a lot about Polaroid, and every page I'm flipping through here, I picked up an awful lot. It is about as thorough as you can get on the subject. It's really good. By the way, my favorite cameras are the Big Shot.
Oh yeah,
and the Polaroid camera. You show up to a party with one of those around your neck, it's like that's it. You're set.
Yeah, you got to do the Big Shot shuffle with that. Yep. Special dance move. That's the only dance you'll ever see me doing. I'll tell you that much.
All right. Well, you guys have lost me totally. But,
basically, it's a camera that only has one focus point. So in order to find it, that you can't move the camera, you have to move yourself. So you go backwards and forwards. It's the camera that Andy Warhol used to use, and all of his paintings were based off of Big Shot portraits that he took.
Right. And needless to say, his Polaroid, his instant photography work, his portraiture has become very well known. Mm-hmm. And I get the sense, Rhiannon, that you've probably tried every single one of these techniques that are in the book. And this is just a labor of love for you, I imagine. Yeah,
completely. I mean, as I said, I am a nerd, and I like to complete things. So I feel like in some ways writing this book was a bit like completing Polaroid for me.
Well, in the second half of the book where you are talking about the techniques, I'm going to just list a few, and maybe you want to mention one of your favorites, and Alan, if you want to chime in with something. But there's the transparency dry lift. You can do multiple exposures, filters, masks, and mosaics, and then the stuff that gets really interesting, where it's microwaving, destructing, scratching, burning, anything you really want to do, I suppose. And the images in the book are wonderful. I wanted to ask a couple things. I mean, are there a handful of photographers out there who you kind of consider what's the word I'm looking for? But like that are dedicated to instant photography and true artists in the sense. And if you'd like to mention some names, that'd be great.
Lucas Samaras comes to mind. He was very big with SX70s and going in with the ends of spoons and playing around with the color, mushing them around and stuff like that. A lot of people started emulating that look. I believe it was Lucas Samaras who was doing that.
Yeah, so he did the photo transformations series. Transmutation. So that series was exactly what you're describing. It was before the emulsion inside of the SX70 image had hardened. It stays soft for a time and you can move it around. So it still retains the integrity of the image, but it literally starts to look a bit like a Van Gogh sort of, twisted, like you can really play with it.
It's as if it was acrylic or oil color under it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it breaks the hard lines up so that you end up with these kind of lighter marks where you're scratching through the kind of the layers and you're pushing the emulsion, and different hardness will change the appearance. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of people that still kind of make use of that, and you can still do that with the modern film to an extent, although it hardens a lot faster than the old stuff. So you have less time to play with it, but of course, you can do things like heat it to kind of keep it supple. You can put it in a fridge to basically halt the development. There's lots of things you can do, but it's just that with every iteration of the film that comes out, which is why it's really hard to write a book about this subject, is that every single one, and a bit like in the early days of Polaroid, it changes ever so slightly. So you have to keep on recalibrating your technique. So I always, say that, you use the technique in the book as like your base point, and then you have to adjust with every generation of the film that comes out. But Lucas Samaras was incredible. And of course, pretty much every photographer before, say, 2000 shot Polaroids. So pretty much take any photographer that you love and you'll find amazing Polaroid work. Like, I don't know, Sarah Moon or Paola Reversi, or I don't know, Mary Ellen Mark, or, pretty much anyone. You can find a whole load of Polaroid work. But in the contemporary sense, there are, some people that are completely 100% dedicated to instant photography. And that's kind of who I tried to showcase in the book, rather than focusing on the big name people, which, are covered already. There are already books like, the Polaroid book. And that book is just filled with those well-known names with work that, if you're into the subject, you'll have probably seen a million times. So I try to veer away from that and actually find people that are doing interesting things with the film. So, you've got people like Carmen de Vos, who is based in Belgium. She takes incredible images. And there's like Thomas Zamolo. He does all of the mosaic stuff, which is incredible. You've got some people who like live in around New York, like Maritza de la Vega. You've got David Salinas, Richard Ton. Like, these are all names of people that I always think are worth looking up. And then, I don't know, just pick any technique. And if you do a bit of in-depth Instagram stalking on some of the Polaroid accounts, you'll find no end of inspiration. I mean, Brian Henry, he is one of he's actually kind of someone I met very early on within the Polaroid like online community, and he used to sneak his way into a lot of derelict properties, take self-portraits, but they're incredibly beautiful. And he tints them with bleach, or plays around with hacking the cameras. And he started doing it when he was super young, and he's been doing it consistently for such a long time. And those people really deserve credit, because it's those people that, without those individuals, I don't think that we would even have Polaroid right now. Because in the end, Impossible Project, it was a fan-backed project. Polaroid.net and Unsaleable, they only existed because of complete nerds like all of us that are in that book, who were, supporting and paying the higher prices and testing the film and giving feedback and, trying to help in any way we could to save the format. And I've tried to feature as many of those people in the book as I could.
You used the phrase that this is like sculpture, and it really stuck with me, because we're talking about, touching, pressure, water, heat, kind of these elements that we don't necessarily think about when we think about photography, certainly not digital photography. But it really brings the idea to heart when you talk about it in that sense. And do you have, of the techniques that are mentioned, is there something that's your specialty or something that you really like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I like emulsion lifting because it's very physical and visceral. It's very much, it also teaches you how to look at things differently, because I make very large composite works. And with those, it's not of one location. It's many, many, many locations all woven into one image. So it's not a real place anymore. It's just, it's like retouching without Photoshop.
I like that.
Interesting. And can you talk? I mean, we won't have too much time to go into it, but can you describe a little bit about what that process entails?
Yeah, so you can do it actually with integral film or with pack film. Integral film is just slightly messier and takes a little bit longer, so I tend to favor doing it with expired pack film that I can still get my hands on. But what it is, as I was describing at the kind of top of this conversation, was the structure of how the picture works. Well, with pack film, you end up with an image on a receiver sheet, and that receiver sheet, it has a gelatinous layer where the dye kind of settles into. And so what I'm doing is I take that receiver sheet, that positive picture, and I cut off the white edges, which don't contain that gelatin layer. And then you submerge the image into slightly warm water. So kind of, I boil a kettle, have a tray of cold water, and I just add it gently until it feels like a nice warm bath, that kind of level. And if nothing's happening with the image, I start adding a bit more hot until it starts to bubble. And what happens is the gelatinous layer starts to separate off of that backing. And then I insert a sheet of non-printable acetate underneath the image, flip the image over so it's basically the viewing side of it is in contact with the acetate sheet, and then lift out the acetate sheet with that image on it. And it's this kind of very transparent, very ethereal, almost like a temporary tattoo, I suppose. And then I transfer that onto a large piece of paper, and I just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and overlap certain parts of the images, or I cut Polaroids into smaller parts. So I have just people or just sky or whatever it is, and I build up these larger images. And with integral film you can do that, but you just have to separate out the image completely. So it's almost like the first part of the when you're trying to make a transparency, which is also listed in the book. So where you kind of heat up the picture and split it into two parts so that the image portion stays on the front acetate of your integral picture, and the kind of the chemical part remains on the negative. That's the ideal situation. The film over time has become more delicate. So it's thinner now with this iteration. So it's a lot harder to do this, but with a bit of practice, you can get it down. You're just going to have quite a few failed attempts at the beginning. So, but hey, there's no such thing as failure. It's just a learning curve. And then you kind of do the same process. You use water and you remove the image. So it's this kind of floating thing in the water tray. That's my favorite.
Basically, though, everything that is in the book, from what I see, are things that people have in their home. I mean, you're talking about water, you're talking about a blow dryer, microwave, things like that. So
very basic stuff. I mean, honestly, most of Polaroid manipulation, you don't need anything other than basic stuff that you probably have lying around. I mean, you might have to buy a paintbrush that is the right softness, but other than that, you should pretty much have everything.
A wood sauce spoon comes in very handy, medium size. The end of it and the edges of it are very good for burnishing and pushing things around.
Yeah. I mean, and even things like a pen lid, things like that, like from a biro, or, you have a letter opener or whatever it is. I mean, there's tons of stuff that you have, like a blunt pencil. There's loads of things that we have just lying around that you can use. And so I think that, a Polaroid picture is sculptural. It is this thing that you have to have a physical relationship with it. And the reason I fell in love with Polaroid in the very beginning, just in a purely photographic sense, was that if I take a picture right here, right now, and I'm sitting here in Keller, Virginia, looking out into the yard, there's a flag flying and some neighbor, it's quite warm. I go outside, I take a picture of that flag, and then I sit inside here and I take a picture another hour, and the temperature will have changed. That picture will look completely different. Even though I'm in exactly the same place, the image looks exactly the same. It's the temperature and the environment, and maybe the way I held it, or if I held it more tightly as I walked in and I squeezed it and I pushed the chemicals away with the pressure of my thumbs. All of these things leave a mark on the image. And so each one of these images, it's a bit like going on an archaeological dig. You can see elements within that picture that are just not part of the photographer making the choices. Are these invisible things that influence the outcome. And that's what I find magical about Polaroid film. It's collaboration between the photographer, the environment, and your physical sense, how hot your body is, what pocket you put it in, how you handle it. I love that.
You just remind me of pit clips. The earlier Polaroids, the folding models, in the lid, they had a little. It was like 2 sheets of thin aluminum with that were bound on the end, like a little book cover. And if it was cold out, you would pull you'd pull the Polaroid, and rather than hold it out in the cold for 60 seconds, you'd put it between these 2 pieces of aluminum and stick it under your armpit. And we used to call them pit clips because it would keep it warm so you could develop properly. And it came with each camera, a little pit clip.
Yeah, exactly. And there are all sorts of pictures I've seen online, of people that are, the main problem that most people ever have who ever shot pack film, so peel apart film, was that you ended up with this this wet negative or wet positive. You're what do I do with them? And you're wandering around and you're trying to figure out ways to store them. And you're like, my hands are not big enough. I can't hold enough of them. So, lots of ingenious people have now made 3D printed little boxes with slots so that you can just put them in.
And you couldn't stack them because they would stick together.
Yeah, you can't do that. And then, I used to have a book which had grease-proof, baking paper in it because that doesn't stick. So it leaves little imprints. But, then at least that was better than them sticking. There were all these kind of occupational hazards that went with it. So I've got a cheats method of how to make one of those like drying boxes that's in the book. So there's lots of stuff like that as well that very physical things about a Polaroid. So sometimes you'd end up with sand stuck to it that you didn't want to have stuck to it, but in a way it all kind of became part of the story of the image. So there was something very beautiful about the fact that single image is tied to that particular space and particular time and was born in that place at that time, which is not something that you can really say of many other photographic processes, bar say something like wet plate collodion. But even that, you're still taking it away from the moment and going to process it. Whereas a Polaroid, it's like literally everything that the picture experiences in its birth, are kind of seen on the surface of the picture. So.
Okay, that is another show. And again, as usual, we could go on and on and on because these topics do go on and on and on. Rhiannon, thank you so much for joining us today. Your current book is The Polaroid, The Complete Guide to Experimental Instant Photography. And you also have another book called Big Fence, Pitcairn Island. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that actually comes out today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know, which is good timing. But so Big Fence, Pitcairn Island, it's a project I began in 2015, and it has taken me this long to get it together. Probably actually the Polaroid book's fault because that came in the middle of all of these years. But yeah, it's a project that is my own photography, so it's not about a subject like this Polaroid book is, and it's about a remote island in the South Pacific, which is called Pitcairn, which is Britain's last remaining overseas territory, and it's 1 mile by 2 miles, and it's one of the most remote and difficult to access places on Earth. There's no airstrip.
Mutiny on the Bounty.
It is. It's the descendants of the Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And today there are fewer than 50 people. So it's a very, very tiny, isolated community. And I was there for 3 months because when you're there, you've got no way off. So I was marooned there for 3 months. I came in on a supply ship and I had to wait for the supply ship to come back. But it contains quite a lot of Polaroid work. And the Polaroid in that book is used in a very kind of specific way to sort of allude to the more fantastical and romantic side of, the mythology surrounding that island rather than what happened later, which was quite dark, actually, because in 2004, the island became embroiled in a high-profile child sexual abuse scandal where 8 island men were convicted. So my story is really kind of the aftermath of that and how that community has recalibrated itself or not, and my experience of it, told through kind of portraits, a lot of Hasselblad images, some taken on my little point and shoot Yashica, and a hell of a lot of text and archive material. So it's taken a very long time to put together. But yeah.
Sounds interesting though. Wow. And Big Fence, Pitcairn Island is published by who? Where can people find it?
It's published by Blow Up, which is a publisher in Warsaw, but it's also available from me, and it'll be available at the Photographers Gallery in London and various other places. We're doing Photo London. I think it's starting on the 11th. So I'll be at Photo London. Got a stand there. So
Oh, wonderful.
And we're going to have links to all of these in the show notes. So if people want to track down and keep up with us, it'll be easy to do. If you love our show and want to make sure you never, ever miss an episode, all you have to do is head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you snag your favorite podcasts, and enter B&H Photography Podcast, and you are free to exhale. It is that simple. And we can always be found on the B&H Explorer website. As always, on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.